Big push now, all the way. Come on, come on, come on, come on.
We've just done some testing, some time in the wind tunnel at the Boardman wind tunnel, where we were looking at aerodynamics, if there's anything else that I can do with my bike position, try and get some free watts, which is always nice. Today we have just been in the actual, I guess more like sciencey lab, and we've been doing some lactate threshold testing and some VO2 max testing. Just trying to get a bit of a baseline, where I'm at, what some of my data and metrics looks like, which some of it I can feed back to Will to help him look at some of the levels that I need to be training at, and I can also use it to go back and be tested in 3 months or so and see what improvements I made, hopefully. Generally sort of keep an eye on my training and some of those other metrics that will help build that bigger picture. Yeah. Yeah, this. From the wind tunnel, I've not changed a huge amount. I think I was already in quite a good position. Jamie actually said he thought my CDA, which is like the coefficient drag something, basically how aero you are, he thought that was going to be lower than it was, but I think one of the advantages I have is that the position that I have I can hold for the whole Ironman, whereas I think some of the people potentially with lower CDAs maybe struggle a bit more to hold that. So, and I know from Kona last year that in the real world my position is really aero and I can overtake people with that without having to put out loads of watts. I think it confirmed my position is pretty aero, which is nice. There were a couple of things we looked at. One of them is the kind of bottle position on the front, which I think again with Ironman it's always a bit of a balance between how can I change things to make them more aero, but what practically do I need? So actually his advice was to take the bottle cage out from in between my arms, but I played around a bit with where else the bottle cage can go, and it's going to have to go back because I can't really drink from anywhere else, and obviously over a sort of 4.5 to 5 hour bike leg I need to be able to drink and take in fluid. So sometimes there's a bit of balance between I might be slightly less aero but I can drink, so that is a bonus. The other thing we looked at quite a lot actually was my cleat position on my shoes. He noticed at the end where I had my cleats meant that my feet were actually out quite wide, which obviously then means my whole legs are out quite wide, and as one of the students pointed out, I have quite big calves, so that's quite a lot of drag being further out. But sort of moved that in a bit, and I've been training with that, and that doesn't seem to have affected my training, so I think that's probably made a little bit of a difference. And that was all we changed really. It's made like a couple of minor tiny tweaks. There's more probably we could look at and try and change around and test, but with South Africa not being that far away, we didn't want to do anything too drastic. Wind tunnel confirmed I'm quite aero, which is nice, and we didn't have to make too many changes. Also very nice when you're training for an Ironman. Well done. Today we're looking at two combinations of what's happening on a respiratory side as well as that, and we'll look at heart rate, we'll correspond it with power output and be able to then formulate really like going forward. So on those hard sessions, it's making sure that we hit those sessions at that power output to really get the physiological strain. But it's also really important to make sure that the easier sessions are at easy. Lactate always has a really bad name and everyone feels like, oh, it's the lactic acid that's hurting and that's the issue. It's not as such, that's the issue. It's a byproduct of anaerobic metabolism, basically, when there isn't sufficient amount of oxygen. And a lot of people like just focus on like VO2 max and look at their watches and like, you know, oh, my VO2 max is 68 and blah blah blah. But like, as with anything, that's one ingredient to the recipe. The lab testing today, and that's just giving a baseline in terms of how I'm using different energy sources, how I'm using carbohydrate, how I'm using fat, at what point that kind of changes in terms of kind of heart rate and effort, which obviously is then quite useful for my training to look at, you know, do I need to try and train how I'm using carbohydrate more or fat more? Or just being aware of, actually, I know when I go past this wattage, I start using that energy source. One of the other things that we were looking at was the difference in power between the Wahoo Kicker and my power meter on the bike, because it's quite different. Obviously that then needs to be taken into account when I'm doing sessions on the road that will set me certain power things for versus on the turbo, because I'd say at the moment I've got maybe like a 20 to 30 watt difference, which is quite a lot. I don't want to then get into the danger of either overtraining on one because I'm trying to hit power that's like 20 watts above what it kind of actually is, or undertraining because I'm not hitting the power right, and then you enter that whole middle ground of you're kind of in the middle of it and you're not going like as hard as you should be or as easy as you should be. And then Jodie was also talking about the fact that with some of the data we'll then be able to look at from the kind of heart rate as well, so I don't have to worry as much about some of the power. So I went and jumped on someone else's Wahoo Kicker, it's not necessarily going to be the same as mine. I'll then have a much more accurate heart rate reading that I can use to be like, actually I know that this heart rate, that is nice and easy and that's where I should be training at, versus when I'm doing the really hard stuff, that's where your heart rate should be at. So I guess it just gives me like a few more metrics to play with, especially when you're traveling around using different equipment or potentially doing some different sessions. So that's all going to be quite helpful, and hopefully will kind of adjust some of my training plans around as well.